It's not a great time being a WWE fan, more so than in years past. While there's plenty of incredibly talented people risking their bodies week in, week out, the creative feels stagnant, ticket prices make it unaffordable for most people, and that's not getting into the very real ties the organization has with authoritarian regimes that's not even bothering to hide anymore. It reminds me of a promo video they put out a few years ago, where Chief Creative Officer Paul Triple H Levesque declared,
WWE is on fire right now.
Which is truer than ever, but not for the reasons he's saying. It's something that sours WWE 2K26, still the only wrestling game released in this day and age, and another entry that's generally good and scratches the modern wrestling game itch, but it's one that for the first time in a while I'm feeling kind of down on. Not just because of the product it represents, but because of what this game is becoming. On paper, it doesn't sound like the most exciting update in the world. There's new wrestlers, new match types, and every other mode got a refresh as part of the yearly iteration. There's finally new commentators with Booker T and Wade Barrett joining the desk, which is a godsend. But I think this underestimates just what this particular iteration does, because it's another game in the series where they're still actively trying new things as part of the rebuild. For one, this game drops the previous generation of consoles. You'll need a PS5, Xbox Series, PC, or Nintendo Switch 2 to play this. It's remarkable because this is one of the few annualized sports games to be current gen only. The only other one I can think of at this point is Sony's MLB The Show. As the first game doing this, there's not a ton the game does to really take advantage of what the newer hardware can do, but I'd be interested to see what a current gen wrestling game looks like in the years to come. New match types are all returning from previous games, so apologies once again to fans of the Iron Survivor match, one day. Free Stages to Hell presents a 2 out of 3 falls with all the gimmick matches, which is always a fun time. The Dumpster match is okay, and while there's some neat ideas with the Inferno match, it's also kind of fine. And then there's the I Quit match, which has had the most work gone into it and presents a slightly different take on the concept. Making an opponent quit now represents a mini-game where opponents need to time button presses to keep themselves motivated, where depending on how much damage you've caused and how you're going in the match allows you to block parts of the gauge to make it harder for the opponent to continue. There's even some voice acting depending on the wrestlers you've picked, which is a nice touch, even if some of the line delivery could have been better.
I quit.
Overall, it's a neat idea. Kinda dig it. One thing this game has going for it has no shortage of characters to play as. Much like with the previous games, the roster continues to iterate on the previous entry, meaning that there's pretty much everyone you'd want to play as from the contemporary roster from Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, plus a smattering of legends, variations of existing wrestlers, and 2K's original characters from the story modes. There's even a wrestler that's actively wrestling for a different promotion in the former pro wrestling known as Yoshiki Inamura, thanks to his time in NXT. For fans of WWE's newest brands, Triple R is represented in its first season pass, but don't be expecting anyone from Evolve. Apologies to fans of Kendall Gray and Cappuccino Jones, maybe next year. 2K are estimating a total of 400 characters as part of the base roster, and that's not factoring in DLC or the myriad of other wrestlers and personalities that people are sure to create throughout the lifecycle of this game. So there's no shortage of character matchups. I just wish some of the looks and entrances were a bit more up to date. I get not being able to add gimmicks or theme songs that were introduced super recently, but there are more than a few wrestlers rocking looks and entrances that are well past an update. I get there's a lot of wrestlers here, but it would go a long way. I still don't think 2K's reliance on variants to pad out the roster is the right play. I'm sure there's a technical reason why they can't just be different attires in lieu of completely separate character slots, because aside from obvious presentational and stat differences, there's not a ton different. It's not like a Dragon Ball game where you could easily make that argument, especially when in most cases the same entrance is used for each of the variants despite them not doing any of their motions at that point in time. As for the existing game modes, they've all gotten to shake up to some degree. Just for transparency's sake, I tend to play these games mostly focusing on the single player story driven mode, so things like Universe or My GM aren't really my thing, but have got some rad updates if you're a real sicko for those modes. Same goes with my faction, WWE 2K's take on the card game mode that every sports game is obligated to have these days. It has its fans, I'm not one of them. First off is Showcase, which focuses around the voice of the voices himself, CM Punk. Where last year's mode felt like a real revelation thanks to some major changes in the presentation and the way the mode played, in addition to its subject matter being relatively underrepresented, this year's iteration doesn't feel like as much as a step forward, and in some cases, kind of a regression. The mode's worst element, time objectives, are unfortunately still around, but in a much more limited capacity, which is an improvement, but they shouldn't be around to begin with. It's not fun to play in a hyper-specific way under a time limit when the CPU could just simply play the video game. The actual problem, however, are the rewrite history matches, where you're given a chance to redo a particular match that Punk wins, which take up a good portion of the showcase mode. None of these matches are particularly satisfying because all of them are basically the same. You play out the match to where it was supposed to end, Punk kicks out of a finish, and then you're given the sole objective to just win the match. If it's meant to give you some creative outlet to redefine how the match ended, I don't think it quite works. It ruins the flow and kills what's otherwise an exciting moment, like Cena busting out a Hurricane Rana to beat CM Punk. The game tries to put some narrative spin on this with talk of ripple effects and what ifs, but the mode or the narrative doesn't want to attempt to try to explore these concepts any further than Punk wins Lamar. But crucially, the mode doesn't want to tell a particularly fascinating story, especially compared to last year's iteration, giving you little context as to why these matches are important, other than Punk saying they're relevant to him, who provides a very brief introduction to each match. It's up to the commentary to do a lot of the heavy lifting and to fill in the gaps, but unless you're well versed in late aughts to mid-10s WWE, a period that nobody should remember, a bunch of the terms and references will just fly over your head. Fortunately, the developers realized that Showcase isn't everyone's cup of tea, and actually provide a novel way to get the Showcase unlockables without engaging in the mode. At any point, you can enter into a gauntlet where you play as Punk or as Life AJ, and take on every opponent in the mode. If you run the gauntlet successfully, you get everything. It's a great idea to still make your own the unlocks and actually play the video game at the same time without having to worry about objectives. You can even do this right from the get-go, so you could theoretically not touch any of the matches barring the intro and get everything out of it. It's ultimately a good idea, and I hope this stays in future iterations. There's also My Rise, where you make up an original character and engage with an original WWE plotline. Unlike years prior, where each either had completely different stories depending on gender, or telling the one story with both male and female characters sharing the spotlight, this year's iteration tells the same story regardless of gender, just the opponents and some minor story elements will differ depending on your initial division choice and based on alignment. It focuses on a much more grounded story, which is fine, and certainly not the first one to try this. This year is also much more streamlined, so instead of there being multiple stories to engage with per chapter, you now just have the one. It's a quicker mode to get through, and compared to previous years, it's nice to not have to worry about playing it 3 or 4 times to get everything out of it. I just kind of wish it told a much more interesting story from the drop. What isn't a good thing is the streamlining has also meant that between each chapter, you now need to grind out matches in between each story moment before you can access the next event, the all too brief story events I should mention. There's enough variety so you not feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again, and depending on how you play, this can be done fairly quickly, but forcing the grind just feels like padding. It's a great way to earn additional stars for the My Rise rewards introduced in last year's game to unlock a slew of additional characters, but stopping the story for this just doesn't sit well with me. Speaking of things that doesn't sit well with me, there's the Island, one of the big new modes from last year, and WWE 2K's answer to NBA 2K's The City. It was a mode that I wasn't expecting a lot from, but 2K committed to it in a major way. Figure it like a pseudo MMO and you're sort of on the right track. The focus this year follows on from the events in last year's story mode, which concluded with you beating Roman Reigns, but his absence has now left a power struggle between 3 new factions, the Order of Anarchy led by CM Punk, the Order of Shadows led by Rhea Ripley, and the Order of Tradition led by Cody Rhodes. You begin by choosing one of these factions to lead in the battle for the island, and shenanigans ensue. There's plenty new this year, which now includes Towers, effectively a semi-run based mode where you'll pick up rewards and matches with widely different additions. There's the Scrapyard, which takes advantage of much more expansive environments that you can now climb around and to really do some wild moments in matches. They're nice additions, but the mode hasn't fundamentally changed all that much. The island itself still feels like a WWE theme park, which is a genuinely neat idea, albeit pretty lifeless and devoid of charm. I wonder if it gives the vibe of something like Mortal Kombat Deception's Conquest mode, but it's not quite as fun and not quite as mysterious, with it being more of a hub between matches you can run around with and explore rather than discovering weird stuff just thrown in there. It's also still a microtransaction sink. While I appreciate it's an isolated mode and not integrated within the core single-player game the way it is in NBA 2K, it's another mode in this game that wants you to spend on it, even with the amount of VC you earn by playing. The mode also still locks a bunch of creator wrestler parts behind it, so if you want to use them to create your own wrestlers or in some downloads, you kinda have to actually play the island. I'm still not a fan of this decision, but given the online nature of the mode and how dress up is a big part of it, I get it, I just think it kinda sucks. I'd also be remiss to not bring up the Ringside Pass, the new DLC model this game has. In lieu of the Season Pass model that has been with the series for years now, this year swaps this out in favor of a seasonal Battle Pass model, with free and premium tracks every 7 or so weeks. Everything you do in the game now has some bearing on the pass, as winning matches gives you experience points to level up and unlock more stuff for the game, in addition to completing certain challenges and milestones in other modes. It presents a way for you to try out each mode in the game since everything now gives you experience, which is a really neat thing. One benefit is that some rewards that have traditionally been tied to certain modes, like Persona cards that have always been My Faction unlocks, can now just be unlocked on the Battle Pass. What this means that you might not ever have to play My Faction to get a reward for something that's all you'd only get out of playing that mode. They give 2K some credit with this, and much like their other sports games, they're promising that none of the passes expire, so you can always go back to another season if you want to get some of the items in it. And at the very least, the first free track gives you all the unlockables you would normally have to spend money on in previous versions of the game. So if you don't want to pay for the premium track, you can still get quite a lot out of the first season if you're willing to play a bunch of the game. The thing I worry about is how this will fare in later seasons. Right now, you won't have to play through the full premium pass to unlock every DLC character, and I hope that'll be the case going forward. I just don't know if trading in a season pass model that worked and was fine in lieu of a battle pass is the right move, where now instead of just getting the thing I paid for, I have to now play a heap of the game instead. It's a move that's great for engagement, but no video game should have to feel like a job if I still have to grind to unlock the things that I paid for. It's a bummer, because ultimately I do like the game at the end of the day. The part where you play the video game, while it's not perfect, is still fun. The game has virtually everyone you'd want to play as, and the detailed creation suite means you'll be able to fill in the gaps unofficially until next year. Showcase and My Rise have an off year, but I know they'll be back next year. They'll be keen to see what 2K comes up with. I'm just concerned that much like the product it represents, WWE 2K is becoming a game that wants to take more of your money, and now one that's wanting more of your time. The island still isn't the mode I want out of a wrestling game, and the battle pass change is one that I'm not on board with. My faction will continue to be a thing as long as sports games continue to exist in their current form. I don't know if turning a sports game into more of a service-driven game works with the yearly model, but if this is what they're doing, I don't know if that's the right play. With 2K still being the only game in town if you want a wrestling game on a modern console that's relatively up to date, it's still a good time, but one that's increasingly going down a bad path.